Hello and welcome to the third part of the first 250 Looney Tunes series. This will be both on YouTube and as a podcast. Now, part 1 was about Bosco and the Merry Melodies over at the Harmonizing Studio, and part 2 was about the shaky beginnings of the Schlesinger Studio with Buddy, everyone's favourite character of course. But now we finally get to the really good stuff, starting with Tex Avery. This is the guy who helped, well, he was actually the one that helped transform Looney Tunes forever. And in fact, he would actually transform cartoons forever. I mean, that's how much of an impact this guy had. And if you watch these cartoons in order like I did, as soon as you watch the very first Tex Avery cartoon, mind is just blown. But for now, though, sit back, relax with me and the Hobo Gadget Band as we discuss our thoughts on Tex. But yeah, the first thing we gotta address is, well, why did they go with this character named Beans before Porky? I mean, you'd think the Porky would be the more obvious character, right? Well, let's see if Jerry can figure this one out.
I think Beans was selected because this is going to sound like a lame reason, but I think it's true, is that he was the most that looked like a character from that period. He's the one who looked the most like a Mickey Mouse kind of thing, you know? He was bland, and that's why they liked that. That was people's perception of what a cartoon is. That's what's so great about Avery comes in and goes, well, let's use the pig. Because the pig is not a natural thing that one would pick. I mean, he more liked coming up with crazy characters like Daffy Duck.
Oh boy, when Tex came in, everything changed. Everything changed so quick, and like even early on, like his cartoons. I'm not gonna say his first cartoons were laugh out loud funny, but they did have his sense of energy, his sense of timing that he was like experimenting with. Like the blowout, a personal favorite of mine. Like he was experimenting with speed, and you can tell whenever Porky is like trying to chase after that villain. It's so much fun, and the music score really adds into it.
Yeah, getting Tex Avery for the thing about the history of Warner Brothers Animations, that it was all, everybody happened to be in the right place at the right time. If you took out any one of the main players, Avery, Clampett, or Tashlin, the entire history would have been completely different. But they were very lucky to get Tex Avery, because I believe he saved the studio, in my opinion.
Alright, so Tex Avery. What can you say about Tex Avery? He is probably the most important Looney Tunes director early on, and probably the second most important other than Mr. Chuck Jones himself. I would have to say that he is just amazing, and considering he basically got the job out of saying, yeah, I've directed shorts, what are you talking about? And no one decided to fact check him. Considering how great his first couple shorts were, I believe Gold Diggers 49 was the first one he did. And there's some really good early ones, like I Love to Sing Ya. That's obviously in everybody's memory. That they always like to push that one. It was in Looney Tunes Back in Action. It's always the first one that they include in any type of compilation. They're really proud of that one.
Tex is very interesting around this time. He brought in the Warner style with a unique sense of comedy that was attempting to go against what audiences would expect. And overall, he attempts to create some of the craziest cartoons around this time, while bringing in different techniques to how the Popeyes did their gags, where I would say that they basically like taking sort of a little unexpected look at things. Tex would try and push that and also leave it to a gradual build-up that led to something else, like more of a punchline than just a one-off gag.
As for my thoughts on Tex from this period, although these cartoons are typically considered very funny cartoons, I feel like the Frizz cartoons from this era were just as good, and if not, they were funnier in some situations. I believe Tex had stated at one point that he, like Tashlin, also didn't like Porky, and to back up that point, we see in the funniest and the strongest parts of his Porky cartoons that he made in the 30s, the gags and the laughs don't come from Porky as much as they come from the situations and other characters themselves. Like in the Village Smithy, the whole funny part about that one is the end with the climax and the weird race with the horse where he ends up reversing and traveling backwards.
So overall, he builds up pretty well from, I would say, 1935 to 1937, where then he directs the Battles of Pingo Pongo, which I felt brought in what I what I would say is the worst out of Tex. Tex around this time, I assume, wanted to create bigger and better cartoons, but that he needed a way to work around it to create cartoons that he felt could break the medium. And he begins making travelogue parodies. I like a lot of them, but they aren't the best of what Tex brings out in his style. If these ones are essentially to what Jones did with the Roadrunners, just the lower budget ones that he did to get out of the way so we could focus on other films.
He just has such a tremendously strong filmography, and his cartoons are just wonderful, especially during the first couple of years when he's mainly working with Porky. I really like that he does a bunch of really heavily story structured shorts like Porky the Rainmaker and Milk and Money. It really it's a nice palate cleanser for just generic song cartoons.
I think Avery, I have a theory of Avery, which maybe it's not a theory, maybe it's well known, I don't know, but is that Avery wasn't really into character, he was into gags. He was into jokes. I don't think he cared about who the character was. I don't know if he was ever quoted saying, just give me any character, I'll make a funny cartoon around it. But that's kind of what he did with Porky. Porky really isn't a funny character. It's just, but he appears in many, many funny cartoons in the 1930s. The cartoon is funnier than the character.
You can say Tex wasn't really about character, but even like those earlier shorts, I would say they're very character-driven. Especially, I love the Bazinga. You get out of my house, you! Is when the dad kicks him out. And Porky's Duck Hunt, which was the first appearance of Daffy Duck, you remember that cartoon because of Daffy. Especially Picador Porky, you remember that cartoon because of those two drunk hobos in the bull costume, and Mel Blanc's just singing like Cucaracha, all drunk and player, and like even Little Red Walking Hood. You remember that cartoon because of the wolf, Red Riding Hood herself, and Egghead, because he's the hero in this picture.
Yeah, he's just a really brilliant director, and my favorite thing about him has always been the fact that he always had an interaction going on with the audience. He used meta humor, so that when you were watching his cartoons, you felt involved when a character would directly talk to you and remark on how like bad a certain pun was. I always liked that. Definitely something that always really set Warner Brothers apart from me.
I tend to like the black and white cartoons over the color cartoons that he made at the period because he had Bob Clampett working with him as an assistant director, so Clampett likes to say. And I feel like Clampett's unbridled enthusiasm and energy is all over those cartoons, more so than Avery was able to push in his merry melodies that he was frankly not having a fun time making in the later 30s.
As I mentioned in my introduction, Tex changed not only the Looney Tunes forever, but cartoons, full stop. And when you watch these cartoons in order like I did, and then the Gold Diggers of 49 pops up, it just blows you away at just how different it was compared to what had come prior. It's just insane. It's like a sledgehammer to the face. Yeah, there were some funny shorts here and there, and some funny moments in a few of these shorts leading up to Gold Diggers of 49, but this was something else. And while not everything Tex did worked, even his lesser works containing a certain kind of energy that no other director, well, at least at first, matched.
So Tex Avery might be my favorite Warner Brothers director, but the place goes for like 3 other directors as well. But still, Tex is very special. I basically like all of his cartoons he did at Warner's. Of course, there was I'd Love to Take Orders from You. It wasn't bad, but it's the one jokeless cartoon I can think of for sure. My favorite is definitely Amateur Night, also because I have nostalgic feelings for that one. I wore that tape out. So and the bird laughing with the Tex voice at the end, it really tore me apart. I was laughing my butt off when I was little. It was the funniest thing to me.
Well, I enjoy a good amount of the ones I've seen. Like A Day at the Zoo is just a spot gag cartoon that has a lot of fun, corny jokes in it, and Believe It or Else I like Ripley's Believe It or Not, so that one I like for that. And it has some funny jokes, like the space scene animation is pretty mind blowing for what the Schlesinger studio did. But before this period, I would definitely rank a lot of his cartoons as being pretty hit, except for maybe a few 36 cartoons. Like Don't Look Now is a bit more Disney-esque, but there's still a lot to enjoy out of it. and I'd love to take orders from you is probably one of the more could just generally be a first film around that time.
Some of Avery's best cartoons. I like The Blowout quite a bit. Gold Diggers of 49 is a classic. Page Miss Glory has some really beautiful modern art designs in it.
And then you also have those merry melodies that he was directing on the side, like I Love to Sing, I Like to Take Orders from You, all that stuff. And considering that he created the prototype of Elmer Fudd, which was Egghead, I mean, Egghead himself, like, I'm not sure if people consider him like a, least favorite Looney Tunes character, but, he had his moments from time to time, especially with his crazy catchphrase.
There's also Paging Miss Glory, or Miss Glory, I can't remember what it's actually called, but that one has some great use of picture effects and such. There's The Blowout, which is probably one of the funniest Porky Pigs from this era. Not the funniest, but one of the funniest. There's so many great ones.
My favorites of these cartoons that Tex was making in the 30s, of course, have to be largely the black and white cartoons. The Village Smithy and Gold Diggers, largely for their fast-paced climaxes that definitely contributed to the Warner canon in some way, one way or another. And The Blowout is one of my favorite cartoons of all time, which I feel, in some ways, is just as good as Dumbhounded and Northwest Town Police, the cartoons that Tex had made at MGM nearly a decade later that kind of had the same plot, just with a different character, Droopy and that wolf.
In regards to my favourite Tex Avery shorts, I honestly prefer his early Porky Pig shorts to his later Merry Melodies, and I think that's just due to how raw they were, with Tex figuring things out and throwing things to the wall and just seeing what sticks. Plus, Tex also had, Bob Clampett and Chuck Jones working alongside him during this time, and you can just see that they were having so much fun making these cartoons. Now, my favourite would just have to be The Village Smithy. Sure, it has that crazy ending that is hilarious, of course, but we also see some amazing gags and timing that grew from the first few shorts that Tex had made.
Travelogue shorts, I didn't like them as much as a kid because, you'd get the Travelogue shorts on the public domain VHSs and DVDs. See, I remember public domain DVDs. Day at the Zoo, I believe it's called. That was one I saw a lot as a kid. I didn't even know that was supposed to be Egghead. True story. That was the only time I ever saw him when I was a kid. So
I feel overall, Tex was off to a good start, but what he needed was the budget and scheduling of MGM with their pictures so he could put more focus and use all of his resources to make each of his pictures good. So overall, if you watch the right pictures, they're going to be fun, but if you watch some of them, they won't be as good, particularly his Travelogue parodies and Spot Gag cartoons. So overall, you get a give or take towards the end, but before that, you have some really good stuff.
And honestly, the only cartoons that I didn't like from the 30s that he directed are the Mice trilogy, like Ain't We Got Fun, Sunbonnet Blue. Only because it feels like he was forced to do that. He wasn't really into it at all. But even those are really good cartoons. It really says something for how good of a director he was when his worst cartoons turn out as great as that. He was a genius.
Now, I honestly believe that Tex had more fun working on the black and white stuff versus his Merry Melodies. I mean, I've got no evidence of it, but it's just pure speculation on my part. So his early effort, I'd Like to Take Orders from You, almost looked as though it was something that Frizz had directed at the time. It was as though the powers that be didn't want that overly crazy stuff for the more prestige Merry Melodies or something like that at first. I mean, it looks nice, but it's quite forgettable. And the less said about the Isle of Pingo Pongo, the better as far as I'm concerned.
Even at that, not every effort came off too strong. I'm not a fan of the Sneezing Weasel. That one feels like kind of like, it's like, not that funny. It's just kind of like, a failed Silly Symphony clone, so to speak. But I would say most of his efforts did hit the nail. Like, they hit the nail just about right. And even some of my personal favorite cartoons he ever did came from Warner Brothers at this time. Like, I already mentioned the others, but, there's so many. I know it's kind of a cheap one, but A Day at the Zoo, Amateur Night, those two are some of my personal favorites. But if I would have to say what my other favorites are, you're going to have to wait until 1940.
But bad Tex Avery's. See, the thing is about Avery is that even the bad ones have merit. But I guess just to follow the theme I've been saying with all of them so far, I love Pingu Pongu because of all the stereotypes. You know, it's just awful. So, yeah. But, like, even that one has redeemable traits about it in places that don't involve the stereotypes. So, see, you can't really go wrong with Avery, like, at all. He's probably my. But the thing is, even though he's the most important director of the 1930s, he's actually only my third favorite. Controversial opinion here of the 30s. So we'll get into that later. But
Now on to Frank Tashlin. Now, if Tex had helped bring the Looney to Looney Tunes, then Tashlin helped solidify that. So, Tashlin had already worked at the studio earlier as an animator, but was then fired. But then later on, he was rehired, and he took over from director Jack King, who we will cover in part 4. So, let's now take a look at everyone's thoughts on Frank Tashlin.
Tashlin is kind of an anomaly in the history of films overall, I feel, because his films right off the start, I believe this is when he first started directing films in general, when he joined the Warner Studio in 1936. His films off the start, like right off the bat, are excellent. I feel that's because he had so much enthusiasm, and he was so happy he was finally able to direct, and that he was pulled away from his job at Van Buren over in New York, and that brought out great films in him.
Yeah, Tashlin. It almost feels like Tashlin and Avery. I don't know much about how much they communicated with each other. In some ways, you could easily see how they didn't, because they're doing two separate tracks of humor in their cartoons. But that said, they both were on the same page about making these cartoons as funny as you could make them. They both had different ways of doing that.
I'm kind of a Tashlin nerd, so to speak. You know, I mentioned my friend Luke Perkins, and honestly, like, he and I both agree that Tashlin is probably the most underrated Looney Tunes director. Maybe not quite as much as Arthur Davis, but definitely in terms of, like, his creativity and his energy.
So with Tashlin, it's a bit interesting because I feel like he picked up where King left off, except that he made entertaining films and ones that genuinely worked. Something tells me that while he already wanted to do the dynamic camera angles, something tells me that with gaining a layout artist, he was able to do that more. And that because the layout artist at the studio probably was knowing what Jack would like doing with some of his dynamic angles, except Tashlin generally tried making an entertaining film more than one that had things presented well in it. And overall, he makes some of the most cinematic cartoons of the time, such as Little Beau Porky, I believe it is. That would be his second cartoon, and I like a lot of his early Porky's where he's fat. Porky's Double Trouble never seeks to amuse me with how it's Mel Blanc doing a fat Porky, but also with the concept alone being a nice one, and overall the satisfying ending of just her going with the criminal and just saying, I'll date you when you get out."
While Chuck was the most experimental director artistically, Tashlin was the most experimental director in terms of filmmaking. You can definitely tell that he was experimenting with montage, cinematic layouts, editing, and all a certain timing that you would normally not get in other cartoons. And, like, the stuff he was doing in animation would eventually help him grow bigger as a live action director. Not, I feel bad that I have to this day not seen any of his live action films, but I'm sure they're really fun in their own right, as I've known them to be live action cartoons. Which you could argue, like, going to live action from animation is kind of a step down, but even at that, there's still plenty of fun stuff to see in his earlier efforts.
Yeah, Tashlin is. I'm glad more people are starting to appreciate Tashlin because I think he's one of the best directors they ever had. And it's interesting with people like Tashlin and Avery and even Clampett. Warner Brothers never could imitate Disney very well, but they could imitate live action comedy very, very well. And even with Tashlin, the fact that he worked at Hal Roach on the Charlie Chase series, that no doubt helped a lot for his future at Warner Brothers.
Tashlin. Alright, so here's the thing about Tashlin. At this point, he is probably the most, I guess, cinematic of the directors. I feel like that's the best way to put it. With Frank Tashlin, I'll say his full name, I feel like his shorts are the most undermined usually. Like, in his second period, there's a lot that I can think of that are, like, you would see them all the time. But in this first period, they're a little bit overlooked. Overlooked. That's the word I'm looking for.
And overall, Tashlin was definitely trying hard to direct his merry melodies while keeping them with how Leon wanted. But they still get a lot out of Tashlin more than like his Porkies. So overall, I would feel that Tashlin's Porkies were more of the highlight because he got to do a lot more but had a lesser character involved. Like some like Holy Smoke is definitely a highlight, and his merry melodies like The World is Full of Cuckoos is definitely a fun one.
The thing I like about Tashlin is that even when he's stuck with a character that he doesn't particularly like, he uses his medium as a ways to experiment stylistically, and he had just a wonderful sense of style to his films, especially with his editing, because it's you gotta hand it to Frank Tashlin. Not many other cartoon directors would try to do like Sergei Eisenstein Russian filmmaker style editing in a cartoon short. He's very ambitious. I particularly like that.
Tashlin had his own thing going on, and it's incredibly influential, significant in the formation of what I call the Warner Brothers humor, the Warner Brothers cartoon humor style, which became the dominant style of the 1940s. Everybody imitated it. Popeye cartoons are imitating Looney Tunes. Every studio was doing some version of what Warner Brothers were doing over there. And Tashlin is absolutely one of the architects of that.
The animation is really good. I'm surprised that he said that he was satisfied with the animators that he had, because like Volney White, his stuff is fantastic. It's interesting how he's sort of influenced by Disney, but I get more of a harmonizing influence from his stuff, especially in the character designs, because it's those round character designs with the big eyes and everything look straight out of like MGM harmonizing from this time. And his cartoons are just terrific during this period.
The Tashlin 3, of course, is probably one of the most notable things where it's just there are better Spot Guy cartoons than Texas because he manages to center them around a good concept and doesn't necessarily pace them like how audiences expect them to be, I would say. Frizz eventually did something similar to what Tash was doing with September of the Rain, and overall, you can tell that Tashlin definitely made a big impact at a studio like Tex did with Freeling. Because as I mentioned, that Freeling was generally the one that made what a Warner Bros. Cartoon was expected to be. So you can definitely tell that both directors had an impact, though Tashlin's probably managed to cement the style more than Tex did.
In regards to Tashlin, I never really knew much about Tashlin until I saw his name while watching these shorts on the Looney Tunes Golden Collections DVD sets. I mean, watching them, my jaw is just on the floor. I mean, these shorts that Tashlin made in the 30s were incredible, using all sorts of weird angles and quick cuts along with some very funny stories. And it's even more incredible to learn that Tashlin didn't even like Porky, and yet he made shorts like these. I mean, it's just incredible.
As for favorites, I love Frank Tashlin personally, so I love every single one of his cartoons. I think he never made a dud. I think they all have some merit to them one way or another. But as for standouts, I feel Cracked Ice, Porky's Double Trouble, Case of the Stuttering Pig, which I absolutely love, where everything magically comes together to work for some reason, and it's a coincidental time, like in the late 30s when every director is at their lowest point, with these cartoons where, in this time with these Tashlin cartoons, for some reason all the people putting their creative energy into them were doing so well that you might even want to consider this period their peak, with Tashlin's enthusiasm and love for making films bringing out the best in him, Carl Stalling using his knowledge from accompanying silent films to come up with great original and sometimes pop music cues for all these cartoons, and of course the animators who were improving as time went on after Tashlin had inherited the Frizz Freeling crew of animators, which included Bob McKimson, Ken Harris, and all those greats.
I kind of like the first period of Tashlin a little bit more than the second period, only because I'm more familiar with those cartoons from seeing them on DVD growing up. But my favorites: Porky's Poultry Trouble, The Case of the Stuttering Pig, Have You Got Any Castles? Those ones are classics.
There's some great ones, I believe, and I really hope I don't make this mistake, but my favorite would have to be Porky's Romance. I really hope I didn't mess that up and say that that was somebody else, or that was another director. I'm gonna look really stupid, but I'm pretty sure that's Tashlin.
Personal favorite of mine, Porky's Building, like that has so much fun, creative musical timing and character acting, and not as much creative shot composition as, say, Porky's Double Trouble or Porky in the North Woods, or speaking of the weather even. But you can tell, like, with those other cartoons he was making, he just wanted to have fun. It's kind of funny that he hated Porky Pig, like he viscerally hated the character so much, and yet most of the cartoons he made with the pig are some of the best cartoons ever in that character's catalog. It's kind of that mindset where he wanted to do a good job even if he didn't like the job necessarily. And even at that, like, have you got any castles? Case of the Stuttering Pig, Porky's Romance, all those other great cartoons have so much fun moments here and there that even if even if they don't quite hit the mark every time, you can tell that they're just so much fun to watch. You get something new out of them each and every time. So yeah, that's my take on Frank.
As for my favourite Tashlin, I mean, for a director that didn't stick around for very long, he made so many good shorts that it truly is tough to pick one, but just like with Tex, I prefer his black and white Porkies. So I'll have to say, Porky's Double Trouble was pretty good. I mean, it's such a great idea for a short, and it even feels like a proper movie, with all the shots and angled views, and, Mel Blake's delivery is hilarious as well. And the ending is just one big WTF, and, I love that sort of thing. So that's my choice.
I was never that big of a Tashlin boy. I prefer his cartoons from when he came back in the 40s. In these 30s cartoons, all his characters look very round, and overall I'm not a big fan of the books come to life genre he sort of invented. Nonetheless, I like his cartoons. He did some very good Porkies like The Case of the Stuttering Pig and Porky the Fireman. His merry melodies could be very charming and artistically rich, like Now That Summer Is Gone. I really don't like it when he got too artistic. I feel like Holy Smoke is one I don't like for that reason.
And least favorite, I wasn't too crazy about Major Light Till Dawn. Yeah, that was like the only one I can recall that I didn't really like. But he was a terrific director, and it was nice. It's always nice to see someone have a long career in two separate fields: live action, directing, and animation. That's good on him.
With Tashlin, look, he wasn't perfect either, just like with Tex. And, for my least favourite Tashlin, I would have to go with one of his Merry Melody shorts, particularly the Major Light Till Dawn. I mean, the stereotypes aside, this one just, I don't know, it didn't have the same punch as some of the others released. I mean, it's possible you might find some enjoyment from this, maybe if you know some of the radio actors at the time or whatever, but I don't know. I didn't enjoy this one too much. I mean, maybe I'll change my view once the restoration appears, but given the stereotypes in this, don't hold your breath.
As for least favorites, again, it's really hard to think of the bad ones because those are the ones that you try to wipe from your memory, right? That's the hardest thing about this, honestly. I can remember the really good ones, but the bad ones I try to forget ever happened, and that's kind of unfortunate because you should remember the bad ones to try to learn from them. But because even the one that I know of that has offensive stereotypes. Oh, okay. It's Have You Got Any Castles, because they got Boris Karloff in here, and what I believe is supposed to be the Phantom of the Opera. And see, that one has stereotypes, but it's also a really funny one in other places. And I believe it has a reference to Universal Monsters, which I love. So I can't think of a bad one.
And that will do it for this episode. Thank you so much for your patience in this part. I know it's been a while since part 2, but thankfully I've actually done the raw editing for part 4 while I was doing part 3 as well. So hopefully part 4 will not be too far behind. But thank you so much for watching or listening to this. And until next time, take care.